Welcome back to The Kicker. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. I recently spoke with Bob Batz Jr., who's been a writer and an editor at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, one of the oldest newspapers in America, for over 30 years. He was also involved in the strike that took about 30 Post-Gazette journalists out of the newsroom for over 3 years to protest their working conditions and their compensation. They hadn't had a raise since 2006. And now that the paper's owners have announced that they will close the Post-Gazette on May 3rd, Bob is involved in efforts to figure out what comes next for journalism in Pittsburgh. Bob Batz Jr., welcome to The Kicker. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I was really interested in talking to you, Bob, because you've been at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for so long, almost your entire career, it looked like, other than a couple of years in Dayton.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about what brought you to Pittsburgh and what the Post-Gazette was like earlier in your career.
All right. Well, it's funny because I did come a long time ago, and people in Dayton, Ohio felt sorry for me moving to Pittsburgh. That's how much life has changed. And that cracked me up even at the time. But I left Dayton basically to become not a news reporter, but a feature writer. But that was the year that Pittsburgh was named the most livable city in America, which also cracked people up because Pittsburgh hadn't become hadn't transformed yet. And so I thought my timing was great. I loved it here. I actually came to work at the Pittsburgh Press. We still had two newspapers, just like Dayton did when I left in the late 80s. And so I started at the Press, which was the bigger paper, did my feature writer thing, late 80s to the early 90s, and then went through my first newspaper strike, which the Post-Gazette ended up prevailing in and sort of taking over the big daily in town. And one of the things they picked up was me. And so there I was. And I was doing about the same thing just for, what had been the scrappy morning daily, moved over there from what had been sort of the dominant, bigger afternoon daily. And so I've been at the Post-Gazette for almost, for 30 years with another strike asterisk, as you know. So I've loved being in Pittsburgh, obviously, and that's why I've been here so long.
I remember being a newspaper reporter in college, and the Post-Gazette internship was the one I always wanted, because it was such an incredible paper. Everybody knew it was one of the best papers in America. It had a huge newsroom. It would dominate every story. I never got the Post-Gazette internship. I applied 3 times.
Where were you coming from for that?
So I was at Columbia here in New York, and then I applied. I worked at my hometown newspaper in Northern California after my freshman year.
Okay.
And then worked at the Daily in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And then after my junior year, I thought, this is the year I can get the Post-Gazette internship. And I didn't even get an interview, but I did land at the Toledo Blade, the other newspaper owned by the Blocks, which was also an incredible paper. This was the year after they had won the Pulitzer. And so, I felt incredibly lucky to be there. And in the Blade newsroom, the vibe was very much distinguish yourself at the Blade, and then you can make it to the Post-Gazette. And a lot of people did that. And so I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you've seen the paper, even before the strike, how you've seen the paper change over the years, because obviously it got a lot smaller than it was in those days.
It did, but I'm happy to hear you sort of praise it at the time that you're talking about it, because to pick up that thread of moving over from the Press was a really great newspaper when I came out to it. It was very big. It was owned by Scripps Howard. They had the lighthouse logo, show people the light, it was very journalistically cool. And they had just won some Pulitzers for some coverage of airline pilots on drugs and some other stuff. So it was a very heady time to be there. But when we went to the Post-Gazette, they became bigger and they grew right into it. We had a great editor, a really strong editor at that time. I don't think we knew how good we had it in terms of money in the early 90s, even where people still read the paper and still advertised in the paper. And we just did some great work. I often I frequently lately have been talking to people about those times because it was a great newspaper and we had a lot of freedom. We had money. Um, I got sent to cover the death and funeral of Princess Diana in London when that happened. That was like a an odd but plum assignment, tons of work, but we just did stuff like that, and we. I don't know that we diminished that much over all these recent years. I've always been very proud of how good and how big the Post Gazette is. We've always kind of punched above our weight. We have a bigger newsroom now than I think almost anyone in the country, especially middle sized papers. And so we had that. Some of our problems weren't numbers or even our budgets, but we've had this protracted labor thing, and our owners, as they recently cited, they say they've lost millions over 20 years, and so there's that. But journalistically, we've been great. We won our Pulitzer for the synagogue shooting breaking news coverage not so long ago. Really, really good work, and we're doing really, really good work this week too. So I was just doing some of that before before we started talking. So
It's been a striking outlier to the trend of regional newspapers just getting smaller and smaller
yep,
and less local news. It has
yep.
always felt like a place you can reliably find out everything you need to know about Western Pennsylvania, and that feels important. Um, but before the labor disputes started, how communicative were the owners, the Block family, about the financial struggles that they now say have been going on for like 20 years?
I mean, that was frequently invoked in different ways. Like, and again, we've as workers, they have not opened their books to us to really know, the sort of the facts of the case. But just like there's no newspaper that wouldn't say it wasn't losing money for a lot of those years. So this that was not something that would surprise us. I think one thing that the workers knew and know, and that the company even would acknowledge, is that the paper might have been losing money, but that's a big company that also owns the Toledo Blade, and more importantly, owns a bunch of cable companies, especially in that northern Ohio area, and until recently owned some broadcast stations. So the bigger company was making a lot of money, and so and I think we the understanding always was that the Post Gazette might be losing money and it might be losing a lot of money, but that they still own the big paper in a big city, and that's a
Mm.
nice thing to own. So yeah, it's not like I don't think anyone was surprised by a statement that they lost money over 20 years. But again, the specifics of it, and I don't know. I don't know how to back that up or not. And so and when they said they were going to close the paper, to jump ahead to something I know is kind of the hot news right now with us. When they said that, they that's when they said they've lost $350 million over the past 20 years.
Mhm.
But the day they said that was an hour after the Supreme Court ruled against them in this appeal they were seeking in this longstanding labor dispute. So it's very complicated, and we still a whole bunch of us still want to keep the Post Gazette as good and as functional as it ever was, and so we're working on that in different ways, and there's people working on it that I don't even know, but I know that the managers and the workers are having open talks about that, and questions, and working together, and we do have some time. It wasn't like we just did shut down, where the company said it was going to shut down in May. So in the meantime, people are working to save that thing that you were talking about, because
Mhm.
I think even that's the unspoken thing even about this labor dispute. It's not just we weren't just talking when we said that we went on strike to save. Like, we didn't go on strike to put the paper out of business. We went on strike to keep it good, and to make sure that it had a lot of workers, and that those people had a living wage and all that kind of stuff. We don't want it to become another shell of a newspaper that just publishes public notices and has 3 reporters, and so
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't changed, and thankfully we're still big and good, and so
Mm-hmm.
for as long as it lasts, that's good, I think.
Yeah. So the last union contract expired in 2017. Then there were
Hmm.
many years of going back and forth, bargaining to some extent. And then the strike was called in the fall of 2022.
Hmm.
Tell me about what went into that strike, both from the perspective of the group, but also for you personally. Not everybody made the decision to vote for a strike. And I'm curious what it meant to you to make that decision.
All right. I mean, and again, I think everything I say is it's just naturally prefaced. I'm just like one guy in Pittsburgh. I'm a journalist, and so I'm much. That's how I'm speaking about all this stuff. There's a lot of people that whose opinions would vary on some of this stuff and their positions, but in this particular case, um, we our last contract had expired in 2017. Our last contractual raise happened in 2006. So when we got to 2022, um, we hadn't really been bargaining. That was one of our issues since 2017 on a new contract. There was no progress happening. And around the summer of 2022, the company, or of 2020, the company sort of, what they say, imposed conditions like, forget this contract. We can't come to any agreement here. We're just going to, this is how it's going to be. You're going to do it this way, and impose things like I got a salary cut, I lost vacation. That was sort of the very personal thing for me. I hadn't gotten a raise since before my son was born, who was in high school in 2022, and so and we had had a lot of much publicized other issues at the paper. Incidents with bosses, uh, editorials that people didn't agree with. We lost some. We lost some black journalists right in the heat of Black Lives Matter over different things. So there was we just had we weren't getting along. We were still doing great work, but the labor situation, the owners and labor situation wasn't good. In the fall of 2022, our other union members in the production unions, the people that ran the presses and drove the trucks and sold ads and stuff, they went on strike because their health care had been unilaterally changed, like we had already had happened to us. And they went on strike. We chose to go on strike on our own conditions. It wasn't like a sympathy strike, but because we had our contract kind of ripped up and had been given a lesser, more expensive healthcare plan and some other stuff. It was very easy just to for me to go on strike. I was like, I had enough. I wanted to stand up for myself. I wanted to stand up for, even though it wasn't a sympathy strike, I felt bad for these other workers and what they were going through. And so it was an easy decision to withhold our labor to stand up for ourselves. And what we said at that time was just that the company was breaking federal labor law, in this way, this way, this way, and this way. And 3 years later, we were told that we're right by the Third Circuit Court.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that just happened too. So it was horrible, and but I never regretted doing it just for that reason. And it
Mm-hmm.
was just to sort of stand up for ourselves, stand up for journalism, keep the Post-Gazette strong, and that part didn't change. So yeah, it wasn't. I never doubted doing that.
Hmm.
I often hated it. To be on strike for that long is a long time. Not to get paid, not to be, you know, not to be doing what it is that you do. Again, I'm a Post Gazette's a place I have 30 years in, so I didn't want to not be there. But so yeah, so now we're back in this complicated journalism soap opera that we're in.
Yeah, could you talk a little more about the financial realities? I don't think any of you were expecting to be on strike for over 3
No,
years,
no, no.
and that is a long time to go without pay, and there was some money raised, but I think people don't fully understand what the financial reality is when you go on strike for that period of time. So could you talk a little bit about what that looked like in your life?
Yeah, I mean, and don't go on strike for that long. We our strike overlapped with hot labor summer. Where especially in news and journalism, a lot of people were going on strikes, but they were doing like 2 hour strikes or 1 week strike. That's how you do it. That's how you do it, I think. But yeah, we when we walked out, that's what we gave up. We gave up our paychecks. We immediately came together to make sure that people were taken care of, that no one was going to lose their house or not eat or lose their car, that kind of stuff. And a lot of that was done with our union, the News Guild CWA, Communication Workers of America. They paid us weekly strike benefits, and that was our money coming back to us from the dues that we paid for many years. So that was good. And that was at the start, that was $400 a week. It's not any big secret or anything. People, that's what we knew, and it's not very much, but it was very nice to have that to get us by. In fact, late in the strike this summer, we helped. Our example helped drive that up to $500 a week for the union, and that's even better. So we get at towards the end of the strike, we got that, but it's not nearly what we made while we were working. Of course, when you're on strike, you also don't get health care. So people, the union and the fellow workers helped each other get on different, state plans or COBRA and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a huge sacrifice, and what people did to kind of stay afloat, besides do side hustles or freelancing, we did raise a lot of money from very generous supporters of ours in the community and across the country, in other labor unions, and in our own labor union. I think it's documented that we raised like $1.25 million or something like that, and people were able to apply for that money that was administered by different outfits that weren't us. The Philadelphia News Guild helped us with that. And so yeah, if you ran over glass and lost two of your tires, you could apply for money for that and get that. But yeah, I think for me, I mean, I know I lost a lot of money over 3 years. There's no other way to look at it. And so I was very happy to get back to work last month and get a paycheck again. But because it is hard, but we didn't choose for it to last 3 years. That's just what it took in terms of the way the courts move, and labor law is slow. The courts are slow. The company's lawyers have more money than we do, and delayed at every turn. So once you were in, you just that's how long it took. It took that long to get through it. So if you would have told any of us 3 years, I mean, that just sounds so fantastical. We would have never. I don't know what we would have done. I think we really, literally would have laughed, because we never thought of that. So it was. And I won't say it goes fast, but it's like everything. It's 3 years in a way before you know it. They were really 3 slow years, I think. Yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Try to go on those 1 week strikes. Do it quicker than we did.
One of the things that was most fascinating to me about the strike is that rather than not publishing the news, you all started your own publication. You edited it, the Pittsburgh Union Progress. You published 4,017 articles over those 3 years about the strike, about things going on in the community, covering big news events, covering local sports. Tell me about what that was like, because that is not a choice that everybody makes when they go on strike. And I found it sort of moving that you all were still producing the news.
Well, and that's a happy thing to talk about with the strike. So it's my pleasure to talk about that. Very proud of that whole effort, that whole group effort that I got to be part of. We had this fight with our employer because we said they were breaking federal labor law, and we wanted that to stop. And so we withheld our labor to protest that and to sort of fight that. But that didn't mean we wanted to not do journalism. Like we're all of us were journalists. And so we wanted to sort of do this legal protest over this situation we were in, but we didn't want to just not do what we did. So, and strike papers are kind of a cool tradition at newspapers, over the years. There hadn't been a big newspaper strike for a long time. So we found ourselves pondering the first strike paper of the digital age. We weren't going to try to print this on paper, and we weren't trying to be a replacement Post Gazette. But that's how we started. It's like, well, we want to keep doing what we do. We want to do it. Our sources want us to do it, and our community wants us to do it. So. We went on strike at around, in the afternoon of October 18th, 2022, and we published our first digital edition of the Pittsburgh Union Progress on October 20th. So just a couple of days later, obviously with being online, it's a WordPress site and some other stuff. It still seemed like a really quick turnaround to me. And we had a story about Joe Biden visiting us to talk about infrastructure after a big bridge collapsed here, which was kind of something. And then we had a mix of features. We had some sports. We wanted the people to do what they normally did and what they wanted to do. So we wanted to keep doing that. We wanted to cover our community, and we wanted to cover our strike, because who else is going to do that? So that was maybe the hard part for us to figure out, because journalists don't typically write about themselves. And but I think we figured that out very easily, because we just kept journalism as kind of our North Star. So if we were writing about us or the strike, we really tried to do it in such a way that it could run in the Post-Gazette or wherever. We kept it very journalistic and true, even on those subjects. And yeah, we just kept going, and we did great work throughout. We lost people as the strike went on. Some of my favorite colleagues had to go take other jobs, or even left the industry to go into other jobs. So it was a weird, sad thing to be the editor of a strike paper and lose one of your star reporters and be happy about that. People would call me like, "Oh, what do you think about this guy?" And I was like, "I don't want to tell you how great he is. I don't want you to take him, but yes, I do, because I want him to, have a job." It was very, very kind of surreal at times because of that. But yeah, we had some great people that we've sent on to other papers around the country. Some of my favorite colleagues, one is in Syracuse at the paper there. One is in St. Louis working there. So we shrunk as time went on, but that was mostly a good thing. But we did not stop.
Yeah.
My colleagues in sports, we drew our bead on high school sports, the stuff that fellow workers do, and that also really matters here. We didn't try to cover the Steelers and the Penguins and the Pirates, but we did that. But those guys would be out, Friday night, this kind of weather, covering a football game, and they'd be filing their stories at 2 a.m, and they were not getting paid to do this. It was the dedication and the professionalism that these people showed was constantly inspiring. I loved working with them.
One of the other surreal things I imagine about working for a strike paper is if you go to cover a big news event, you're running into colleagues from the Post-Gazette proper who weren't on strike.
Yep.
The strike vote was a very narrow one, 38 to 36. And I know there were a lot of hard feelings on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
There was true acrimony there in many in many instances. And so I want to hear a little bit about, and I know this isn't the fun stuff to talk about, but what has this been like in terms of the relationships between you and people who had worked together for a really long time, but made different decisions about whether to strike?
I mean, acrimony is still there. We've been back to work for about a month, a little bit more than a month. Month and a half, and there is a lot of acrimony, because those are like binary choices. You either go on strike or you don't. The amount of time that it lasted adds to that. There were no fistfights at news events that I'm aware of, but people would say things to each other, and it was because you're on different teams. But I know that since we've been back, we do have a long ways to go on that, because you don't just click it off, and go back and you're all friends again. There might be some people that were really close friends that'll never be friends again. I think that's very possible. but you we're working together to put out a paper now, and I think everyone would agree. One thing that everyone might agree on is that it's been kind of a professional return, and I feel like the former strikers have been professional. I think that the people who kept working have been professional, and the managers have been professional. So um, it hasn't been easy, but that's what we know what our mission is.
Mm.
Our mission is not to argue about things that happened 3 years ago or 2 years ago or a year ago, but it's to try to do journalism. And so we went back and are working very closely with people that we were you know kind of arguing with hours earlier. I don't know how else
Mhm.
to say it. I think professionalism again maybe is a north star to sort of stay on track and to keep going.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I certainly personally, I like to look forward, I really do.
Mhm.
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how close the strike vote was, or that it came up out of nowhere, or there's all these things that did happen. 3 years is a long time, and we were considering these kind of labor issues for years before that, so it's really longer. It goes back to like 2007, 2006 for people that were born by then. But yeah, I don't spend a lot of time looking back at stuff like that or holding grudges. I do want to keep going, and I want to keep doing journalism in Pittsburgh, and that's what we're doing. But
Mhm.
it's not something I'm not trying to gloss over it. I just don't know what to say. I mean, I have acrimony in my heart in a lot of ways, but I don't try to act on that or say anything. I'm just trying to do what I do, and
Yeah.
we'll see if we can sort of repair some of that, because we need to even in the short term. We have to keep doing that, I think.
Yeah. So in 2023, the Guild started racking up legal victories. An administrative law judge, then the National Labor Relations Board, then multiple rulings in your favor from the Third Circuit. And basically, they all found that Post Gazette management did not bargain in good faith. Um, And I'm curious what it was like to see those decisions sort of cascade, and when you started talking about, like, "This will be the one where we vote to end the strike."
Well, I'm impressed that sort of the journey that we've been on, because it is very complicated, and I think what's funny is we haven't been able to sort of celebrate this or broadcast it, but just like this month we finally won one, like big capital WWON. But the news of the closing kind of eclipsed that right away, and so we had to go from, we didn't celebrate actually winning at the Third Circuit, fully winning yet. But yeah, this thing that we won this month, a few days ago, we actually won it in January of 2023, when the administrative law judge said that the Post Gazette wasn't bargaining in good faith, exactly as you put it. That's like the summation. But then the company appealed it right away. So we kind of felt foolish for celebrating our big win
Mm,
at that point. And when they appealed it, then it starts dragging out over the months. We got the full NLRB confirmation of that judge ruling in the fall of 2024, and I think we didn't celebrate as much then because we kind of knew how stuff worked or didn't work.
mm,
And of course, there were more appeals on top of that, and we just had to keep surviving these different appeals. And there's not ways you can speed it up. The judge doesn't call you and say, "I hope everything's okay. Can you last for another year while we?" It becomes like a legal thing. So it it's I don't know, it's really weird that what we just won is what we already won in January of 2023, and it makes those intervening years seem kind of like a waste, and not much has happened except surviving appeals and continuing to fight it. And attorneys, it was good for attorneys on both sides,
mhm,
but it wasn't good for us. So
mhm,
and that ruling that we just won earlier this month still has to be enforced, so it hasn't changed our lives at all. Our ultimate thing was because the whole crux of this dispute rested on the fact that no bargaining was actually happening towards a new contract. Um, we wanted to get a contract back. We wanted to bargain a new contract, a new deal
Mhm.
that said, this is how many hours you work a week and this is what you will pay you. And now I, we have won we have won the old contract back, it looks like. But if they're going to actually close the place down at May 3rd, I don't even know if we have time to actually get,
Mm.
a contract in place. Bargaining a new contract seems, unlikely and kind of pointless if that's really going to
Mhm.
happen. But we
Mhm.
don't really know. I mean, I don't doubt what the owners of the company told all the workers and the managers that they're going to close down, but that's May and this is January,
Mhm.
so we don't know exactly know what's going to happen, and we're trying to get some more clarity on that. And but yeah, the thing that we wanted was just to get another deal that both sides could shake hands on, and then keep going forward and doing good journalism. We did great journalism for more than 90 years with the Post Gazette as a union of journalists. No, I don't think the journalists ever went on strike. That wasn't an issue, and we really, until recent years, we were just partners in doing good journalism. We won the Pulitzer together. We did lots of other great work. We covered the community. Um, you can do that in a union, and that doesn't those aren't mutually exclusive. I know what we expect the company to do now is the one thing they can still do is ask the Supreme Court of the United States to review the Third Circuit's last ruling, which was to not rehear the whole case. So there's no reason to think they wouldn't ask for that. There's no reason to think that the Supreme Court will actually hear it, but um, I guess we really won't, celebrate until that actually plays out too, and that could be a long time. But
Sure.
celebrates the wrong word. When I mourn the fact that some of my favorite journalists had to move to different cities,
Mm.
and I'm never going to be happy about that. I have really great journalistic friends and colleagues who got out of journalism over all this, and that's sad to me.
And as all these decisions were coming out and going in your favor, to what extent was the idea that the blocks could just close the paper on your minds?
They always could do that. They could do that. Any owner can close their business anytime. Um, so that could have happened before the strike. It could have happened during the strike. It could happen after the strike. They weren't linked in any way. That's certainly not why the strike happened. Was to I know that some people would like them to change their mind and have ideas for that, and other people are working on ways to not have that be the end of even the Post Gazette. So we'll see. You have to
Mhm.
follow us these next couple months. It's not going to be. It hasn't been boring for a while. I would love for some boring.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that on January 7th, the Supreme Court declined to reconsider the Third Circuit, put a stay on that order, and then the blocks announced immediately that they were closing the paper effective May 3rd. Tell me about what that day was like. I assume there was a bit of whiplash involved.
Oh yeah, it was not a good day. It wasn't one of my favorite days of my career. That was what was that? January 7th was a Wednesday, and we when the we already had won our case, or and I'm not even going to say it that way. The NLRB won the case on our behalf, and in the Third Circuit, and we never really properly celebrated that. But that's what precipitated us voting to go back to work in November when we did, because we saw that we couldn't win anything else. We won what we set out, what we said we were gonna, why we were on strike. So we decided to go back to work. We went back to work on the 24th of November, and on the company's appeals continued, and on this, and that included asking the Supreme Court to, stay this one part of this while the legal procedure kept going. So we're back at work for what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and some people got the news that the Supreme Court said no, we're good. Everything looks fine. We're not going to hold this up. That seems like another win. But then we got a note from the company that just said mandatory meeting for all employees in an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. And it didn't take. It wasn't hard to figure out what that might be. And a lot of people are still working remote, so not everyone was in the newsroom, but they were able to get on the Zoom, and it was just like a very short one person video announcing this and saying that we've lost all this money. And that statement is out there, sort of, because it was so brief, you could almost quote it all verbatim. And we decided to close down as of May 3rd, and that was it. And the video went off. There was nobody around to answer questions, so some people thought that wasn't the best way to do it. Certainly not how I would have done it. But they have said that they're going to close it, not sell it. Or I know some of us have come together to talk about, well, what if we tried this, or what if we tried that? But they didn't say they wanted input like that.
Mhm.
We're still happy to offer it. There's a whole bunch of really smart people that work at that place still, and very committed people. So we're trying to see if we can get that to the family and the board that run the company and also run the Blade. And in the meantime, the whole community is feeling some whiplash too. I think there's people that are just community members and readers that are wondering what's up, subscribers, people at other outlets here, the foundations. We have a Press Forward chapter, which has a lot of money across the country to fund journalism in these trying times. They're trying to figure out what's going on. So there's a lot of sort of scrambling happening right now in and around Pittsburgh to deal with this in one way or another.
Mhm. And it seems from the outside like there's a decent amount of optimism considering, what could be really depressing circumstances. The guild president said you all are already working on plans for a new Post-Gazette. The CEO of the American Journalism Project said in an op-ed in the New York Times that conditions for journalism in Pittsburgh remain favorable and seem to clearly be hinting that they're interested in getting involved. Pittsburgh's obviously a huge philanthropy town.
Mm-hmm.
So the possibility of a nonprofit outlet seems present. Tell me about how you're sort of balancing work, producing the newspaper that is still coming out every day with trying to figure out what comes next.
I think it's been a lot of like night meetings, for people that are interested in some of these options, and that includes journalists who are on strike, journalists who aren't on strike, managers and supporters and friends in the industry. So it's a lot of hours and stuff, and trying to save journalism in Pittsburgh is a lot of hard work too. So I think some of us are really kind of worn down to a nub. Um, I don't think we had enough time in between these two things, sort of going back to work and being on, from being on strike to going back to work to now trying to save journalism. But it's the situation that we're in. So yeah, since the news that the company said it's going to close down, we've been meeting like crazy at night, and there is an effort right now. The workers, sort of a worker-led effort, a journalist-led effort with the community to, I would say, I mean, the former strike paper is part of the conversation. It's an inspiration for it. Like, instead of saving the Post-Gazette, which is, that's one thing that could happen, but could journalists start their own outlet, like has happened in lots of places around the country? And could it be supported by the community? And could it be aimed to do what the community wants? It'd be a different thing than the Post-Gazette. But that effort is kind of coming together with the community, with people that support us, many of whom supported us during the strike, but mostly they just support good journalism. People want journalism. They really do. And we are lucky to have people that really care about that. So I know a lot of those people are working with the workers on that. I'm sure that a lot of those people would support other efforts that come together. If there is like a big philanthropic push, or if someone wanted to buy the Post-Gazette, or even if, there's the hard part now is in a way feeling like we don't know what's going to happen. Um, we've just heard that they're going to close, that they say they're going to close, but that's not until May. So it almost makes it harder. We can't, that they're going to close isn't even a given, I guess, in some people's minds. Later on tonight, I'll have a meeting with community supporters to talk about some of these alternative models that are out there. We don't want to, we're not just giving up. We're not just going to say, oh, well, that's it. Um, that's not what we do. And so, and our community doesn't want to give up either. So, like in a lot of places, when the big outlet is threatened, I think people rally together to try to save something about that. And that is the optimistic part. That's the good part. No one's saying, oh, who cares? And that, well, maybe some people are, but not many. It's a lot better to write about the news than to be in it. I'm so tired of people talking about me and writing about me or my outlets or whatever. It's terrible. I'd much rather be writing about other people. But everyone has an opinion on this, and some people are like, well, maybe we don't care about the big daily, and maybe this is a chance for these other outlets to ascend. Like we have some nonprofit journalism, we have some public broadcast, we have these other niche populations. So there's a lot of ways it could go, but it's not. The one thing about it's not going to be like there's no news here. It's just it could look quite a bit different than it has for a long time, and again, we're talking, not that anyone in this business, especially now, is particularly sentimental, but this paper is the roots of this paper are 240 years old. We're almost as old as the country is. And I think that no matter what people's issue might be with, owners or coverage or incidents, I think there's a shared community pride in the fact that we have a news outlet that's that old and that big and that comprehensive. And, it gets back to what you were saying about remembering how it was to get an internship there. There's always something special about that kind of a news outlet, and something important about it too. And so, I hope some of the models I like going forward aren't just me. Like you and I could start our own outlet probably by Friday. We might be able to get funding for it, and we might, like, if we could write about cats, I don't know, labor cats or something, and we could each make 7,000 a year, have a great time doing it. But it's not the same thing as covering a community and being large and holding power to account and being ready to respond when someone shoots up several congregations, that kind of thing. It's if you've gotten a taste of it from doing it or reading it, it's a very special kind of thing. And I'm hoping that whatever happens going forward, we can preserve some of that scale and some of that sort of journalistic power. That's all there is to it. So we'll
I
see.
think that's such a good note to end on. So, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll look forward to having you or a colleague back when there's something new and exciting to announce about what comes next.
No, it's
Thank you, Bob.
yeah, and thank you, and I appreciate you kind of knowing what's going on. I think part of our problem was our situation has been hard to explain and for people to wrap their mind around. But in a way, it took a long time. But we did what we did to sort of preserve local news, and we're still going in that same. That's still what we're doing. We just had to have a few hitches along the way. So please do follow us, and I hope we have some good news to share with you down the road.
Excellent. Well,
All
we're
right.
all rooting for you.
Thank you.
Things are now moving incredibly quickly in Pittsburgh. Just since Bob and I spoke last week, a group of his colleagues who did not strike have filed a motion seeking to overthrow union leadership in hopes of negotiating with the Block family. Meanwhile, Bob's colleagues who did strike have formed a group they're calling Paper, which is looking into worker ownership models, nonprofit models, and what they call the prospect of a truly independent Post-Gazette, and they're fundraising for those efforts. So there will be a lot to watch in Pittsburgh in the coming months, and we'll try to stay on top of it. The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. Amanda Dara is our producer. I'm Megan Greenwell, your host, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks.